A 1, a 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can be serious or silly when you paint with Robin and Lily. Mama's a teacher, I just write songs. Come and join along.
Hi, I'm Robin.
And I'm Lily.
We are Robin and Lily.
For the love of painting. Welcome.
Today we're doing a watercolor painting that is a winter scene with a red cardinal sitting on a branch, a little bit of snow.
You know, the winter months can be very difficult because it's dreary and sometimes bleak. But I even wrote a song once about how a bird inspired me to find color in the middle of winter because blue jays and cardinals, their color pops so vividly when there's no other color around.
Snow, especially against the snow.
Right.
So let's start by talking about our watercolor paper with starter lines. If you're working from a Robin and Lily painting kit, you're going to have both a blank piece of watercolor paper and a piece that already has starter lines, just like ours. And today we're going to start from here and we can draw together. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
We're going to start near the beak and the eye of our cardinal. We already have starter lines that sort of represent the head. So let's look at the beak. Let's go ahead and add the line that divides the upper part and the lower part of the beak. So we're just going to draw a line there. And then there is a little bitty dot for more of a dash, really, for the nose or the nostril on the beak. All right, so let's do an eye. It's just a round circle, not too big. Kind of look at where you're positioning that. Kind of comes naturally, I guess. All right, so then we're going to draw a line that represents some of the color that is on his face. I'm just going to come down and around the eye. It has a little bit of a point, a little bit of curviness to that line, right down under the beak. If you want to draw a few small dashes that sort of represent feathers, you can do that as well. On this side, we already have our starter lines show a bit of texture where the feathers are coming out. All right, so there's a line on the neck that gives us a little bit of shadow. The wing on the right side. You can start right about here and 2 or 3 little swooshes to the point. So the wing comes near the branch, the bottom side of the wing. Your drawing is going to look different from our drawings. Our drawings will look different from each other. So don't fret about that. Just relax, sketch lightly, and it's good if your drawing looks different from ours. Every piece of art that we do should be individual and our own. All right, so we're going to finish the top part of our cardinal. Let's come down and bring that belly right down near the branch. Don't touch the branch yet, because we've got to add some snow in just a moment. All right.
Wait, what did you do? I missed it.
Bring the belly line down,
Okay.
but don't touch the branch yet. Go toward the branch, a nice fat belly, but stop before you get to the branch because we're going to add some snow there in just a moment. All right, so we're going to work on the branch that's under our cardinal. Let's start. This line that we have, the starter line, is this top line of the branch. So let's go beneath that. You can start all the way over on the edge of the page. Let's go beneath that, and we're going to draw what is the bottom half of that branch. 2 parallel lines. Okay, this line continues. Our branch splits off, so we're going to continue right over here again, and I'm going to go a little darker on this line, the starter line. You can trace over those if you need to. You can continue those starter lines right off the edge of the page. So each branch, as you can see, has a top line and a bottom line. On this part of the branch, it divides off into, again, splits a little bit. So we're going to draw those branches. This part that goes up away from our cardinal, same thing, that branch splits into two. So just follow along so that all of your lines are parallel, and that gives dimension and a sort of a 3D quality to our branch. It's not just one single line, but there are two parallel lines. Awesome. Okay. At the top, let's go ahead and finish the branch that is above or behind our cardinal. Same thing, this line, this starter line, is a branch. We're going to go right off the edge of the page on both sides. If you're not using a kit, if you're not using a piece of watercolor paper that has our starter lines, my main encouragement to you would be to draw big, to really make sure that bird is big enough and those branches are big enough that it goes right off the edges of the page and that our bird is really a focal point. We always draw large, or we try to. Okay, so we started our upper branch. Same thing, we're going to draw a parallel line that just follows that shape and texture. A few bumps, a few wrinkles in the line are good because this is an organic branch. So when we get about here, where there's a little bend in our line, we're going to go up. That branch is going to break off a couple of times and go right off the page. You can make up your branch. You can't do a branch wrong, so don't worry about it being exactly like mine. All right, let's keep going with the branches. Parallel lines. As the branch breaks off, we continue with those parallel lines. We're going to come back in just a moment and lay down some snow that's laying on those branches. If this looks complicated to you as we get over here on the right side, simplify it. Make your branches smoother or only do one or two little branches.
I might be making my branches a little more complex because I've always had a fascination with trees and branches. I've been drawing trees since I was literally 10 years old. I remember the exact day. Mom actually took me painting in plein air. So we went outside and took our portable easel into a big field, and there was a giant, do you remember what kind of tree it was? I don't remember. It was a huge tree at the bottom of this big grassy field, which the grass looked much smaller when we were on top of the hill. And we started walking down and the grass was like up to our necks, or I guess I was a kid, so up to my
wasn't
neck.
that tall for me.
Walking through the grass, and then we sat underneath this tree, and I looked up, laying on my back at all of the branches, and I was like, how in the world do you paint that? How do you paint a tree from underneath it looking up? And ever since that moment, I've been completely enthralled with drawing trees. So I definitely go very complicated with my branches. But it's just split and then find a parallel line. Split and find a parallel line.
Exactly. That's a good way to describe drawing the branches. Okay, so I have finished my upper branch with the smaller branches that break off. And I'm ready to set my cardinal down on this bottom branch. Actually, no, let's do the snow first. So we'll start at this branch where the bird is sitting. That snow is bumpy. It's just a little bit of a light snow that's sitting on the branch. So a few bumps as we come along. Also, almost parallel, but not quite, because you want to give some texture to that snow. Think about how the snow would fall on the branch. It's going to be on the top. It's going to settle into the crevices in the corners where the branches split off. You cannot do this wrong. Your snow will be perfect, no matter how you lay it down on the branch. Here in the triangle or the corner part, make sure you really let that snow kind of gather. It's a full little bit of snow as it settles onto the branch. And make sure every branch gets a little bit of snow on top. Then we'll move up to the upper part of our drawing. Again, some bumpy, textured snow laying on the branch. And if you're wondering how we will paint white snow, actually, we won't paint white snow. Often when you're painting with watercolor, the white in your painting is simply the white of the paper showing through. Rarely do we use an opaque or solid white in watercolor because watercolors are thin and watery and you can layer them to create a glaze. We seldom use paints that are opaque, that means solid. So for white, usually we just let the paper show through and we don't really use a white watercolor paint. I have a little bit more snow that I need to put on this branch. And let's look, oh, the tail, we haven't drawn our tail. Our branches are looking great. Our snow is settling down on the branch. Let's finish our tail. From this wing, the tail goes behind the branch. So it's just a tiny little line that represents the tail. It comes back out on this side. Same thing here, the tail is behind the branch and it comes out on this side. So we're kind of connecting our lines. And the last line that represents the tail. All right, I like it. Okay, I'm thinking of one more line that I want to draw and then we'll start painting. I think we need to close in this, there's black under his beak. And so let's take these lines and sort of connect the dots or connect the lines so that we have this fluffy little shape under the beak. Perfect, yeah. Now I feel like we're ready to paint. Okay, so let's talk about our colors. Our cardinal is red and we have alizarin crimson.
Alizarin.
Beautiful word, beautiful. We have a little bit of Payne's gray, which is another word for black, really. And this is an ultramarine blue. Now let's talk about shadows, especially in snow or in a cool winter painting. You might think the shadows are gray or black. They're not. Really, every shadow that we ever see has color. So if you haven't noticed that, look a little more closely at the shadows that fall. If you're in a warm place, the shadows will have warm colors. If you're in a cool place, especially a scene with snow, the shadows will have cool colors. So we really will be using blue in our shadows.
All right.
Okay, and remember, the snow will just be the white paper showing through. Let's start with our Payne's gray, a little bit of black. Add some water, load your brush. We're going to paint in this mask. It does not have to be a solid black or a solid gray. Let the water or let the color kind of move around. Texture, I would call that texture in the color. So you're not trying to just paint a solid black, but we're using the water and the color to give it a watercolor effect. But we are going to paint in the entire mask of our cardinal bird. Right now we're painting wet on dry, so we're using the paint from our brush on the dry paper. If your paint looks more solid than you intended, drop a few drops of color and just let it bleed and do its own thing. That's the most fun when painting with watercolor, is to let the paint drop and bleed and move around on the paper. Beautiful.
Yeah, mine is darker than yours for sure.
It's okay. Variety.
What's next?
Let's do the branches. So the branches, they're going to be a more gray color than brown because it's winter. So again, much like this black or Payne's gray that we painted on the Cardinal, we're going to paint all of the branch, but let there be some variety in your color. So a little bit of dark, a little bit of light, but all the same sort of Payne's gray.
So Mama taught me a trick when I was young for how to follow a line, because I was very concerned when I was 10 years old with coloring inside the line, or even...
Which is not important.
Which is not important, that's true, but generally speaking, we've set lines here on our page, and if you really want to follow the edge of that line, what she taught me was to look with your eyes at the part of the line right before your actual brush. So you're looking ahead of where you're actually drawing or painting. So you're really looking at where you're about to lay your color or line down and not where you are. And that kind of helps you follow the exact shape of what's before you.
You're looking at where you're going.
There you go.
Yeah. So, for example, I'm going to paint in this branch, but I'm going to be looking just ahead of my brush. I'm looking at where I'm going more than I'm looking at where I'm at. Try not to make your branches too dark. We do want them more of a gray than a black. If your branches are too dark, you can lift up paint. With watercolor, you can pull away from your painting as well. If you dry your brush a little bit, I'll show you an example here on the bird. That paint is still wet. I can take a drier brush and literally pick up the color. See how I can pick up the color? And so if your branches are a little too dark, you can go back with a dry brush and actually pick up the paint color. Lighten it up. Another way to lighten it is to add more water.
Accidentally colored some of my snow. It happens.
Just makes for a thicker branch. Not a problem. As you finish up painting your branches, I would encourage you to do two things. You might want to make the bottom, I know these are thin branches, but if you can make the bottom side of every branch a little bit darker, that's going to cast a shadow on that bottom side of that branch. Also, make sure you have some variety in that gray. A little dark here, a little dot there, because you have to think about all the shadows and all the textures of color that are coming into play here. Every branch is casting a shadow all down through that tree. So not any one branch is going to be a solid gray. There's always going to be variety and texture in your color. So let's go back and add a little bit of a shadow on the underside of our branches and a little bit more variety of gray, darks and lights. I'm going to do that by just adding dots that just drip down and bleed into the color that's already there. And I'm also going to follow that bottom line, the underside of each branch, and give it a little bit of darkness on the underside. That actually adds a lot to the painting, don't you think, when you get that dark shadow?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I really want you to notice that texture. There's dark, there's light, it's all gray, but there's a variety. Awesome, love it. Okay. We're going to add a little blue, very, very light blue. So we're going to add a lot of water to our ultramarine on our palette in just a moment. And then we're going to use a very light blue to highlight the sky, and that's going to make that snow pop. Okay, so just above, in fact, let's do this wet on wet. Just above every line that represents your snow, take a clean brush, rinse your brush really well, load your brush with just clean water, and I want you to paint with just water along this line that is the snow, just above it, almost as if that water is sitting on top of the snow. So the water is very crisp and smooth along the line that is our snow. But up here above it, in what would be the air or the sky, you can just let that water just kind of bleed out. Be playful with that water. Okay, so I have put down my water. Tiny little bit of my gray is bleeding off into that because it's still a little wet. That's okay. We can make corrections. We can pick up that color with our brush. Okay. Now I'm going to add water to my ultramarine on my palette, and I only need a tiny bit of the blue, and I do need a lot of water. That way we're getting a very light blue. Now when I drop my blue, my ultramarine, very light blue, onto my wet paper, two things are going to happen. When that blue hits that crisp line, that edge that is the snow, the paint's going to stop right there. It's not going to bleed onto the dry paper. But at the top, above the snow, where I've left water, we're going to let the blue just kind of bleed upward. That's going to give us that watercolor effect and also represent the sky. So right along, and you can see you don't really have to paint as much as drop the color. And you can see how it stops along that line. I love that effect. It's almost like magic. So the blue is stopping when it hits the snow, but it's bleeding as it rises up into the sky. You can always go back and add more water, especially at the top where you want that blue to just fade into the sky. When we're painting with watercolor, you can almost never use too much water. You know, it is really about the water.
It's true.
So
the most common mistake is using too little water.
Mm-hmm.
Dry brush effect is a real technique, but it's not the whole point.
Oh, I just realized I forgot to draw snow. You have yours. On this top branch up here, I didn't draw any snow, so I'm going to go back and draw a little snow. And then keep painting my sky. Again, very light blue. I almost started painting with the blue, which is fine, you could do that. but I forgot I was using the wet on wet technique, so I'm going to go back. As I go down to the bottom part, I'm going to continue with plain water so that I'm still painting wet on wet with the blue.
I will forever mix my waters up. Always.
We have two waters. We haven't really talked about that. We have two waters. One is for really rinsing your brush when you have a lot of paint in your brush and you want to really clean out the paint. And the second one is more for just painting with plain water. When you need clean water, like we're adding to the paper, then you want to use that clean water.
Guys, I don't really know what I'm doing here. You're gonna see me making a lot of mistakes. She doesn't even know how many times I'm making faces over here because I'm like, doing something wrong.
Well, that's not wrong there.
What is wrong, really?
You can't do it wrong.
Art is subjective.
That's right. It's always your own, something of your own making and creative, and you really can't do it wrong. That's true.
The water. My two waters are so mixed up at this point it hardly even matters.
Once again, I am more controlled. Lily is always looser, comes naturally to her. I'm noticing her blues are deeper, they move around a little bit more than mine do. If you look at my painting, it's really very controlled, and I do have the darker part of the blue very close to the snow, and then as the blue goes up into the sky, it fades into just a light blue. So you can keep adding water and moving that blue around all the way around the bird. So now we're painting right up to the edge of the bird as well as right up to the edge of the snow. We do want to give that sky behind the bird a little bit of blue. So paint up right up next to the bird and then add lots of water to just let that fill in the sky very, very lightly. If your sky is much, much darker than mine, that's okay too. It may just be that sky that you're looking at is a deeper blue that day.
You know, even I had to learn how to not be afraid to throw vibrant colors onto the page when watercoloring. When I really first started watercoloring specifically is when I was in college, when I was doing that travel abroad trip to Italy. And I can look back to those very first ones, those first paintings that I did, and they're so light, they're so faint. And I remember my professors coming back and saying, girl, you need to put color on the page. Like, don't be afraid to throw it down. And I was like, okay.
Yeah,
here we go. But honestly, that was before I started my acrylic style. So that moment kind of planted a seed in me to throw color on the page.
Yeah, I love it. I should probably throw a little bit more color. I'm going to add a little bit more blue. It is beautiful. Okay, now at the bottom, we don't have snow at the bottom, but we do need to think about this sky down here. So, much like this area, which is a very, very light blue, I'm going to just paint with plain water, again from my clean glass of water. I'm going to fill in everything around the bird at the bottom with just water, add a little bit of blue so that it bleeds into a very, very light blue, and I'll be finished with my sky. Okay, so the clean water and lots of water at the bottom.
Does anybody else have like a little nervous thing they do when you're focusing on something? Like I lick my lips and suck on my lips when I'm focusing, and my lips always get really chapped when I was in college, when I was doing homework or whenever I'm painting. It's such a weird little thing.
If I do, I don't notice, but I might when I watch this video back.
We'll find out.
I don't think I'm biting my lip or anything. I know some people stick their tongue out.
It's got to be something in your brain.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
Today we knew we were going to be turning our painting around as we painted, so we chose not to tape down our paper. That's okay, but we're also going to get some warping and kind of rolling of the paper, because as it absorbs that water, it's expanding, and as it dries, it tightens back up. So don't worry about your paper having some warp to it. That's just part of the water effect. Later, if you want to put that in a frame or something, that will flatten down just fine. Okay, I'm ready for that last little bit of blue. Oh, you're already down there. All right, here we go. Really, really light. What I love about that is it really does look like snow. There it is, the white paper showing through with the blue behind it, and suddenly we have snow sitting on the branch. So let's talk about balance for a moment. Even though I just said, let's make that bottom sky really, really light, I'm suddenly noticing that there's a lack of balance because we have these darker parts at the top. So I'm going to come down to this very corner.
I did it right here. I just naturally did it. I didn't think about it.
It could be under the bird, it could be down, but I am going to add a little bit more of that darker blue so that there's balance. I'm going to put mine down here and let it bleed up into the top. Actually, that adds a lot to it. That little bit of dark at the bottom really does balance out all of that blue. Okay. Beautiful. So as we think about those shadows and those highlights and where our light source is coming from, I'm simply going to paint my entire bird red. I'm going to paint wet on wet. So again, I'm going to start with water, clean water. Make sure your brush is really, really clean. Make sure your painting is really dry. Fill your brush with just plain water, and let's just paint the whole bird with just water.
If you're finding it difficult to see the water you're laying down, if you kind of adjust your perspective a little bit, you can usually find the light reflecting off it. My my black is already bleeding into my water a little bit.
Yeah, mine is too, but that's okay because we're gonna have those shadows in the texture of the feathers. So that little bit of gray that's bleeding into the water, it's not gonna hurt anything. Again, it's also part of the watercolor effect. Okay. You know what, we can go ahead and do the beak as well because on the cardinal, the beak is red. All right, a little bit of water, a little bit of red. I'm just going to let that completely fill in the beak and the red part of the body, all the feathers.
Almost took from your palette. I'm gonna do that at least once every video.
Beautiful. Yours is already a deeper, richer red. I did mine lighter. I'm going to let mine dry. And I'm going to come back with a second coat of red, a second layer of red, and give it a glazing effect.
So we actually took a moment to blow dry our paintings. That is an option as well. It's up to you whether you'd like to blow dry it or just let it sit and air dry. And we noticed while we were blow drying that this time our papers really are warping a little more than we're comfortable with. So we decided we are going to take this opportunity to tape them down so we can more easily continue to work on them.
If you don't like the warping at all, you can buy watercolor paper that's part of a block that has a wax or a glue all around the edges, and each layer of paper it stays completely flat while you're working on it. Or you can tape down from the beginning before you wet the paper while it's still very dry. You can tape all the way around the edges and you'll get much less of that warping from the water on the paper. Okay, looking beautiful. Now that it's dry, we're going to add another layer of red, and that's going to give us that glazing effect. Don't be afraid to really make your red bright and beautiful. We want it to pop. So we're going to add more red. Now that we have our red fully painted across our bird, we're going to go back in and add a little bit of texture for the feathers and some shadowing. Remember, we talked about, oddly, our shadow is more on top of our bird than it is on the bottom because so much of our light is reflecting off the snow and really, just making the bottom side of his belly lighter than the top. So we're going to use blue for our shadow. Yes, it's going to make a little bit of a violet or a purple, but oftentimes, like we talked about in the beginning of our show, the cooler shadows have blue. So we're going to use a little bit of blue for a shadow. So let's add a little bit of ultramarine blue to our brush. And above the wing, we're going to add just a few strokes of blue. You can dot the blue, you can stroke the blue. You want a little bit of texture. It has, they are feathers. You want a little bit of texture for the feathering effect. On the head, up here underneath these feathers, a little bit of blue. It's going to bleed, it's going to blend. That's a good thing. This part of our shadowing, we're not trying to control it a lot. We're going to let those shadows kind of move around. Along the neck where we drew a line before, some strokes here for feathers. You can add more water. You can move it around with the tip of your brush. Bring the blue down as well for a little shadow under this wing. I really like what this blue is doing, creating shadows mixing with the red. You can come down into the tail and have some shadowing under the branch and between the feathers of the tail. Don't be afraid to just drip water. Add a little extra water. Let those colors move around. Add a few strokes on top of the wing. Remember our shadow is mostly on the top. And add a few strokes for shadows on the top of the wing, on the top of the neck. And then a little more water to keep things moving around and blending together. I'm even going to put a tiny bit of blue on the top of his head. Again, there's that shadow at the top where the belly is lit and brighter and the top of our bird is a little darker. I'm going to go into my beak as well. Again, shadowing a little bit more on the top of the beak than on the bottom. A thin line between the top and the bottom beak. Add some drops of water. Even though most of my belly is bright red and I want to leave it that way because of the light that's reflecting off the snow, I am going to add a little bit of my blue and my shadow right where my bird touches the branch. While my wet paint on my feathers is drying, I'm going to go back into the black or dark gray mask. As you can see, Lily's dried really dark. Mine dried really light, and it's much too light for me. So I'm going to add a little bit of that Payne's gray and go back and make that black mask on my Cardinal a little bit darker. Okay, I'm going to make a few tiny strokes. I want you to really look at what I'm going to do because it's going to be very, very light. My brush is clean. I'm going to rinse it until it's completely clean. I'm not even going to add water or color. But right here on this top, there's got to be a name for that poofy thing on the top of the Cardinal. Right here, I'm going to take the point of my brush and pull tiny little pieces of color, just like that. Give me a little bit of a feathery effect. Be very, very light and really a clean brush, just pulling a few little strokes of color away from the feathers to give it that feathery edge. I'm going to do that at the top of the head, and I'm also going to do that on the neck just below the beak. Again, very faint. Few little strokes, very, very faint. I like it. That gives it some texture. Oh, I don't think it's too much. I like it. You got it?
Just the other side of this poof.
I need to touch up my beak. I'm going to try and leave the bottom half of my beak a little bit lighter than the top half of my beak. Shadowing does so much. It gives depth. Contrast is really important in a drawing and a painting. And shadow and highlight creates contrast. And it just gives it so much more depth. Oh no!
I smudged my red onto my blue.
Okay, so the way to fix that, get clean water in your brush, kind of rub the water right on there, and you'll be able to pick up some of that color. I'm going to get off screen for a minute.
Give me a tissue.
Grab a little tissue. You can blot onto your paper and actually pick up color. So if you make a mistake, it's almost like erasing. Add a little water and blot, and it begins to disappear. Okay, awesome. Beautiful. I really like how Lily added enough blue to her shadows that you actually get a more purple effect. It's just beautiful that way. I have less blue in mine, but I like the blue.
You have more actual brush stroke texture, though. I just have blotches of color.
Well, it's bleeding. Again, exploding.
Yeah, true.
Okay, beautiful. We're going to work on the eye. We can only do the eye if that black mask around the eye is completely dry, because we don't want anything that we paint on the eye to bleed in any way. Mostly the eye is a dark gray, but we're going to try and leave a tiny white spot. Human eyes, animal eyes, even our little bird eye typically has a reflection from the light source, and there will be a little white dot left. You can either draw, I'm going to draw it just as an example. You can either draw that tiny little spot that you're going to leave white, or you can just leave it white as you're painting. I drew my little white dot, so I'm going to paint gray on the circle part of the eye and leave that white dot. Definitely want your gray part of the eye lighter than the black mask around it. Ooh, that turned out good. Awesome.
See, okay, but you can now see the effect, difference between Mom using the pencil to outline her reflection. Actually, that line helps because I left a little white mark, but because it's not outlined, it's not quite as sharp. So I'm going to go back with the pencil and outline.
Okay. I'm also going to add a tiny black dot right in the center of the eye. Now we're working really small, and these little details, they don't have to be perfect.
Especially when they just bleed. But you know, whatever. I'm just going to leave that as it is.
Yeah, that's a really tiny detail. Don't worry about it.
This is still bleeding down here. I'm struggling with my tail.
Do you need that Kleenex back? That tissue's down there. I'm still adding a tiny bit more texture to the black mask. Just a little bit more Payne's Gray, another layer. When I'm getting near to the end of a painting, I want to check for a couple of things. I want to check for contrast. Make sure that parts of my painting are nice and dark. So our deepest shadows, our darkest areas, rich color, and a little bit of dark. And then the opposite being the highlights, the white paper showing through, the snow. That creates our contrast, so dark and light. I also want to look for details. If you're trying to paint really loose, which we are, don't go back and fix too many things. Don't worry about where the color bleeds. That's actually a good part of the watercolor process, is to let the colors kind of bleed. Are you feeling finished? I love yours.
I love yours.
How does that happen?
I'm feeling partially finished except for this tail area that obviously I'll need to go back and work on after it dries. But yeah, I really like it. I definitely wouldn't have expected so much blue in the red, but it makes sense.
In your feathers, your shadows, and your sort of violet-y.
Yeah, but I feel like I even did more blue than you a little bit. So.
Yeah, you did.
Oh, see, that's the fun of painting with Robin and Lily. It really doesn't matter how you paint, what your style is, whether you take this super seriously or you're just here to learn and have fun. We have a little bit of everything for everybody. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, here's some more information on our paint kit subscriptions. So if you have joined us for the first time and this is the first video you've seen with us, welcome. We are happy to have you here with us. We do offer subscriptions to paint kits that come with everything you would need to follow along with our videos here. You'd get your own paint palette, your own Da Vinci watercolor paintbrush and a drawing pencil. You'd get a step-by-step card that is how-to illustrations of all of the steps. And you would also get 2 pieces of watercolor paper. Today, you saw at the beginning of our video, we had starter lines on our paper that will always come in the subscription kit, a starter line paper, as well as a blank piece of watercolor paper for those of you who are willing or ready to branch off and do your own thing and take some creative liberty. If you would like to only purchase one of our art kits instead of a subscription, we have that option as well if you visit www.artbarnstudios.com. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us and painting along with Robin and Lily.
It's been fun. Bye.